Now, Laurie is the author of the national bestseller Stick Figure, A Diary of My Former Self, and she's also a journalist whose work has appeared in the New York Times, The Atlantic, Time Magazine, People, Glamour, other distinctive publications, including the LA Times, and she's a frequent commentator as well for NPR's All Things Considered. What we're going to be talking to her about is her dynamite book out of Dutton called Marry Him, The Case for Settling for Mr. Goodenough. And this has created a lot of talk and a lot of shock and a lot of controversy, and I think you're going to enjoy this. Laurie, thanks so much for being here. I'm happy to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I think the first thing that we want to talk about is, first of all, why don't you begin by giving us an overview of this book, and then we'll get into some more specifics.
Right. Well, the book is really about looking for what's important in long-term love. And, that includes chemistry and physical attraction and all of those things. But a lot of times we're too picky about the things that aren't going to matter, and we're not picky enough about the things that actually do matter and are really important in terms of having a happy marriage.
So that's what this is all about.
So that's what this book is about. And, it's not my opinion as a journalist. It's me going around to experts all over the country trying to get at, what is important in long-term love? What actually are the qualities that matter? What are the things that matter? Because maybe we're not looking for those things when we're dating when we should be.
Well, now, what prompted you to write this book?
Well, I had a child on my own, not having found Mr. Right. And what happened was, once you have a kid, you kind of hang out with married people a lot more because the single people don't really want to hang out with you and the baby.
Right.
And so, I think married people don't really talk to single people a lot about the realities of their marriages. And they don't really share, with the same kind of candor what really goes on. And so once I wasn't married, but I had a kid, and I was, sort of in the club, and so people would, I'd hear a lot about people's marriages in a way that I never had before. And a lot of people would say to me, the things that they really loved about their husbands, these qualities, were not the things that a lot of women talk about when they're dating. And I thought, gosh, if I had known, it's not that we all have our head in the sand and we don't realize that these other fundamental things are important, but I think we don't place enough emphasis on them, and we place too much emphasis on the things that don't really matter to people once they're in love with someone and they're married to them.
Now, when I got the book from your publisher, and of course they send a lot of very interesting material along with it, the one thing that they certainly talked about, all of the gals that are working as publicists in Dutton, they're basically single women in their 20s and 30s, and this book had them talking.
Yeah.
Did you have any discussion with these gals about your subject as well?
Well, I think it's a subject that is of interest to people because, I think we all have questions about who is the right person to spend our lives with, and what qualities should he have? And, so many people who are out there dating struggle with this, and they really, it's the perennial question that women ask each other when they're out there dating. Why is it so hard to find the right guy?
Now, you had written an article, first of all, had you not, for Atlantic magazine? Yes. About this. And this was something that your editor was interested in your pursuing further. Is that how the article came together?
You mean the book? No, actually, what happened was
the article in Atlantic that came before the book.
That came before the book. The article, yeah. The article was basically my saying, I think that maybe when we're dating, we're not putting enough emphasis on the right qualities, and I didn't realize this until I sort of, had more perspective, had more life experience, and really talked to my friends who were very happily married. They weren't in perfect marriages, but they were in very happy marriages, and really talking about, what matters. And so I thought, gosh, we don't really talk about this when we're single. We don't really think about it in the same way. And we should if what we're hoping is to meet someone that we are going to spend our lives with. And so when the article came out, it was a very hyperbolic article with a very simple and serious message, which was, let's examine our criteria and see if those are the criteria that make us happy. But, I think that a lot of people, just the idea of, my saying, well, maybe this whole we can have it all attitude has gone a little too far, that offends people because, I think that we grow up thinking we can have it all and we deserve the best and you go, girl, and all of that. And I think that's great. But I also think that when you're talking about another human being, it's hard to apply that to a person.
Right. Well, now, did you expect the firestorm of discussion that came about as a result of the article, or were you surprised by it?
I was surprised because I thought I was simply, stating the facts, which is, I didn't make up how the world works. I was sort of stating the facts that, when you're younger, you have a much easier time finding someone who's closer to your ideal than you do when you're older for a variety of reasons that, just on the face of it, I don't think anybody would dispute. But because I was a woman and saying this, I think, it was offensive. They kind of were shooting the messenger. And, do I wish the world worked differently in terms of gender politics and age and the ages that people like to date? Yeah, of course I do. But the fact is, given that, let's make smarter choices. And that doesn't mean that you should change your criteria when you get older. I'm saying instead what you should do is from a very young age, you should try to focus on what's important. You should focus on that always. And you're going to have a lot easier time finding it when you're younger than you will when you're older. But I'm not saying because you're older you should lower your standards. You shouldn't lower your standards. You should definitely have high standards, but make sure you're having high standards about the right things. And that's not about height and hairline and things like that.
Okay, now when you say older, are you referring to women in their 40s or even women older than that?
There's no age. There's no cutoff. It's just, I'm just saying as you get older, it does become more difficult to find someone closer to your original ideal because the dating pool is much smaller. Because as you get older, if you want to have children, and you want to find somebody who also wants to have children, that person may want somebody younger, so maybe they could have multiple kids and there's more, time flexibility there. If you want someone closer to your own age, you might want to, think about how that's going to change as you get older. So and also as we get older, everybody is going to have some kind of, baggage that they carry along that you don't have when you're younger, because when you're younger, you're with somebody and you guys kind of develop your baggage together.
Right.
But as you get older, some people are divorced, some people have kids, some people just have a lot of, experience of disappointment out in the dating world, and we bring that to the table. That's just the nature of being older and, going through life. And so the person is going to be different from that person, at 28 is going to be different from that person at 38.
Well, the reason that I asked you to define the age is because I'm sure you know that in the Palm Springs area, there's quite a mix of ages. There are younger single women and men. There's middle-aged single women and men, and then there's the retired men and women. And many of the retired women might have been married before. As you said, perhaps they're divorced, perhaps they're widowed. And they've gone through life with someone, and then they have that picture in their mind of, okay, I want somebody else, but this is what I want. So where does all of that come from, that whole idea of making this long list of who you're going to settle for that has created these problems that obviously women are facing, and possibly men?
Right, yeah. The problem with the list is that it turns out that the list, what we write that we want on the list isn't necessarily who we're going to fall in love with. So, for example, somebody was just telling me the other day that she met somebody on Match.com a year ago, and they just got engaged. And she was 31 and he was 33, and she knew he had been married before, but she didn't notice that he had checked off the box that says has kids. And she said she wasn't looking for somebody who already had kids, and she would never have gone on that first date with him if she had noticed that. So they were on their first date, and he mentioned his 3 kids. It wasn't just one, it was 3. And she ran home and she thought, did he lie on his Match.com profile? But no, he actually had checked off that box. She just hadn't noticed. And she said, if I had known that, I would have just clicked over to the next guy and looked for somebody who didn't have kids. But maybe I still would be out there dating and not have found the person that I fell in love with. Even if I was dating all these guys who didn't have kids, the person I happened to fall in love with happened to have kids. And not only did she fall in love with him, but she really, really loves the kids. And so, we think we know what we want. We think we know what that person is going to be like, who's going to make us happy. And often we're wrong about that.
Well, I think that's the important point, and I want to get back to your statement too in the beginning that you said women have grown up believing they can have it all. They can have the big job. They can wait as long as they want to wait to get married because that can come later. They can travel. They can do all of these things, and so they lose sight of the fact that the clock is ticking. And then it's a shock to them when it happens that now the men that are around their own age want a younger woman.
Right, and it's not so much that the men are shallow and they want to date, a 25-year-old Victoria's Secret model. There are men like that, but I interviewed hundreds of men and women for this book in addition to the scientists and the researchers, and what was interesting was a lot of the men said, it's not that we're so shallow, it's that we want marriage and family. And if we want to have our own biological kids, if we haven't met the woman yet and we have a choice of somebody who is probably fertile and somebody who's probably not so fertile, and we have a choice of going on a first date with either of them, and we've been told about both of them, they're cute, they're smart, they're funny, they're interesting, they're kind, who are they going to pick? They don't know either of these women yet. They're going to pick the younger woman to go on that first date with because they know they want to have a family. So I understand where they're coming from. It doesn't make me happy that women have a biological constraint and men don't, but I think that it helps to understand where the guys are coming from on that.
Yeah, but I also think that the women do come to realize these biological constraints. It's suddenly you wake up one day and you're in your 40s, as you are, and decided you wanted to have a child, and you had the child. And if you wait much longer, then it's too late for that.
Right.
So that's a very important part of it. Now, you did talk to a lot of experts. Just give me a list of some of the experts that you did talk to.
I talked to neurobiologists about chemistry and what really makes for chemistry, how important chemistry is, how much chemistry we really need to be happy. I talked to marital researchers who study, what are the things that make us happy in marriage? What are the things that, lead to divorce? I talked to matchmakers. I talked to clergy. I talked to a rabbi. I talked to sociologists. I talked to behavioral economists about sort of the demographics of the dating pool at different ages. I talked to dating coaches. I talked to divorce lawyers. I talked to psychologists. I talked to couples therapists who work with couples all the time. And, it was a really wide range. I talked to cultural anthropologists to get at, some of the gender issues on, why, women are drawn to what they're drawn to and why men are drawn to what they're drawn to.
Now, did you talk to this group of people in preparation for the article, or did this really come together with the book?
For the book.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's fine. And so were you surprised with what they had to say to you, these experts?
Yeah, I was constantly surprised by what they were telling me because it so goes against our cultural notion of, how we fall in love and what love is really about. And, a lot of it was that, we actually have this very fixed idea of what it's going to be like when we fall in love. And that if you talk to married people, a lot of times they'll say, if you say, was your husband, your type, and was he what you were looking for? And they'll say, oh my God, no, I never thought I'd be married to someone who's this, that, or the other thing. And that's their Prince Charming. But they didn't, that wasn't who they thought would be their Prince Charming. They're like, I'm so surprised that I'm married to someone. I thought I'd be married to someone creative, but I'm actually married to this guy. Or, I thought I'd be married to somebody like this, but this is who I fell in love with. And you hear that a lot. And I think that that's really important for people who are dating to know because I think they think that it works differently. And sometimes it does, but sometimes, and in fact often, it doesn't.
Did you start out interviewing married couples, or did you mix it up with the singles as well?
I mixed it up. I was interviewing lots of different people throughout the process of reporting the book.
So I would assume that you had different reactions from those two groups.
Well,
responses, I should say.
I think it really speaks to the perspective, which is that, when you're in your 20s, it's hard to imagine what is going to be important to you when you're, when you're 25. It's hard to imagine what's going to be important to you when you're 35 or 45 or 55. And I think that a lot of people who are younger think about the for better or for worse part of the marriage vow. They think about the for better, but they don't think about, like, who do I want to be with me during the for worse also? Like, who do I want for both of those things? Because a lot of people will tell you that, the person who's there for the for worse is the person that, is you really need. You can't have someone who's just there for the for better, and a lot of us are dating those guys who are the for better guys.
Laurie, I think I'd like to have you explain a little more the title, because, as you said, you were getting some reactions to that title, and making it some people reading it were believing that they had to settle, as in the title, and that's not how it was meant. Can you talk about that a little more?
Yeah, the book is not about, settling for somebody that you're not completely in love with and want to be with and attracted to and all of those things. It comes from a survey that I cite in the book where men and women were asked, if you got 80% of everything you want in a partner, 80% of, your ideal partner, would you be happy with that? And women said, no, that's settling. And men said, 80%, that's great, that's a catch. And so, it's that perspective difference where I think, what does it mean that, what does it mean to settle? Like, how are you going to be happy with, 90%? Are you going to be happy with 99%? Because you can't just order up the qualities that you want, like on an a la carte menu. I'll take a little of this and a little of that and a little more of this and a little less of that. A person is a package deal, and they're going to, if they're a pretty appealing package, why would you throw them out because there's one thing in the package that you don't like if it's not something that's a major thing? And, just to give you an example, there's another survey that was in the book where men and women were asked what would be a deal breaker to go on a second date. And men named three things. They said, she has to be cute enough. She doesn't have to look like, Angelina Jolie by any stretch of the imagination. She has to be cute enough. She has to be warm and kind, and she has to be interesting to talk to. And she gets a second date. And I think those are all legitimate criteria.
Right.
Women, on the other hand, named 300 things.
Well, yeah, in the beginning of the book, on page 3, you've got your own list, and it's 2 3/4 pages of
yeah, and
things.
I think a lot of us don't realize that we have that list. I certainly didn't. A married friend had said to me, you have this list, and I said, I don't have a list. I'm not a 16-year-old girl with a journal. I don't have a list. I always just fell in love. And she said, I'll bet you have a list in your head. And so, women named 300 things that, that they would disqualify a guy on to go on a second date. We're not asking you to marry the guy. We're saying if you had a good enough time, but you didn't have a thrilling, amazing experience, but you had a pretty good time, why not go on a second date and spend another 2 hours with this person?
And so they cut it off.
They cut it off
after the first date.
Right, and but for ridiculous reasons, because
right.
And that's the sense of entitlement that I was talking about, where I think that women really feel like he has to kind of meet my expectations of the Mr. Right that I have in my head. And, a lot of people are nervous on a first date. And maybe the guy who's nervous on the first date would make a great partner long term for you, but, he's just not good at the first date. But we prevent romance from happening by making it, stop before it even has a chance to get going.
Yeah, you mentioned this whole idea of entitlement. It's the culture of, quote, empowerment and girl power, and I'm so fabulous, that's gotten to the point where women are egoing themselves out of relationship after relationship. And you go on to say that in reality, most of us are pretty ordinary, and a lot of women have trouble seeing that. So why is that? Why can't they see it?
Because, I think the reality is we're all Mr. and Ms. Good Enough, but once we fall in love with that person, we become Mr. and Ms. or Mrs. Right. And so, when you look at other people's spouses, would you necessarily think, oh, that's Prince Charming, but that person who's married to him really loves him. And so, I think that women are always telling each other, oh, you're such a catch, and any guy would be so lucky to have you, and you should never compromise. And I think that really does everybody a disservice because, we do have our good qualities, but we also are going to be less than ideal in some ways for whoever picks us, whoever says, whoever falls in love with us. And he's going to have to, make some compromises to be with us too. And I think we forget about that. We forget that nobody is this mythical, perfect person, and nobody's going to be, everything. And so there's, we definitely should have high expectations, but there's a difference between having high expectations and having a completely unrealistic sense of what you can offer a partner and what he can offer you. And people have those unrealistic expectations not only in dating, but sometimes in marriage as well.
Yeah. So, but where does this come from? Is it the culture? Is it the women's movement that started this whole thing? What is it? What started all of this?
Well, I don't think the problem is the women's movement. I think the women's movement is great. I think the problem is that a lot of us, thought that the women's movement was telling us that we should have Brad Pitt as our husband.
That's it, exactly.
But the women's movement never said that.
Right.
Feminism never wrote a dating manual. Feminism never said that. Feminism said it is about equal opportunity, respect, and equality. And those are the things you should look for in your marriage and in your relationships if you don't want to get married, if you want to have a relationship, whatever it is, in whatever it is you do, your work, your personal life, your romantic life, those are the things that are important. They never said you should look for perfection. But a lot of us thought, oh, having high standards means not compromising. Well, relationships and marriages are all about compromise on a day-to-day basis. Ask anyone who's married, and they will tell you every day you have to make decisions. Are you going to maximize your own needs or somebody else's needs? And somebody has to give, and, you've got to have a workable way of doing that. And if you're not going to compromise, you're going to have a really hard time in a relationship.
That leads to my next question then, and all of these experts that you talk to. What is it then that's different about men and different about women that create this huge gap that the men seem to be more realistic about it? What did the experts say to you about the men?
Right. Well, to be fair, there are plenty of picky men out there.
Oh,
too.
yeah. Well, especially in L.A.
But what they were saying was that men really can compartmentalize their needs a little differently, which makes them more realistic about what they can expect in a marriage. Whereas women have this kind of fairy tale idea that even if they think they don't, because by the way, if you ask most women, do you have this fairy tale idea? They're going to say, no, I'm not. I'm not a teenage girl. Of course not. But women really think, he's got to be my best friend, and he's got to be this, that, and the other thing. And yes, he does have to be your best friend, but what is your definition of best friend? Is it that he has to hear the details of your book club? Because maybe he doesn't want to hear the details of your book club meeting. That doesn't mean he's not your best friend. You don't have to have every single interest that's the same. That doesn't mean he's your best friend. He's your best friend if you guys, can talk to each other. It doesn't have to be about your book club. Guys don't care if you want to hear the details of, the baseball game that they just went to. They know that they have, their work friends for this, their colleagues for this, their best guy buddies for this other thing, and they have all the things they love about you in the marriage, but you don't have to be everything to him.
Yeah, I have a young friend that said that to me one time, that she thought her husband was great, but he didn't want to hear about what she was doing in her life. Well, it involved makeup and stuff like that. And I said, I really don't think that most men want to hear about makeup. That doesn't mean that he's not a good husband. Take a look at the rest of him.
And and it's so funny that you mentioned that, because a lot of women will say, I want a guy who's really stylish, but not so into clothes that, he's effeminate, or, it's like they want all these contradictory things. I want a guy who's really ambitious and successful, but I want him to also be home with me and the kids. Well, which is it, you know?
Yeah, well, they're setting themselves up for failure then, aren't they? Because
Exactly.
no one can meet these needs.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's talk about the fact that you did look at a lot of arranged marriages in this book, and the fact that women don't have to give up the idea of a soulmate. How do those two things connect, and what did you learn about arranged marriages? That seems to be happening a lot. All of these .com internet sites that are hooking people up.
Yeah, I think that, in Marry Him, I talked to a lot of different people, and what, one of the people that I spoke to was Rabbi Wolpe, who's at Sinai Temple here in Los Angeles, and he kind of said to me, look, I've dealt with newlyweds over all these years, and I deal with, married people in my congregation, and when newlyweds come to me and they say, I've met my soulmate, he said, I just smile and nod, but in reality, do I think that that's the one person in the whole world that they could be happy with and fall in love with? No. He said, the notion of a single soulmate is lovely, but it's not reality. In reality, he said, there are many potential soulmates. It's just that your soul develops differently with different people. And so I think that, people, now I'm not saying we should, go to arranged marriages here, but, but I did talk to an expert who studies arranged marriages and in the United States. And she said that she, in her research, that she studied people who were in arranged marriages in the United States and people who were in, regular, I fall in love marriages in the United States, and that when she saw who was happier, it turned out that the people in the arranged marriages were as happy or more happy than the people in the, quote, love marriages. And so, it's not that the people in the arranged marriages don't fall in love and don't have physical chemistry or don't have any of that. It's that they looked for the important qualities first. Did we have the same values? Do we have the same life goals? Do we get along? It's not like, the guy just showed up at wedding day. They actually got to meet him before, and they could say no, and sometimes they would say no. But they didn't say no necessarily because, he was kind of awkward on the first date. They said no because he had different life goals or different values. One woman said, I wanted to have a career, and he didn't want me to have a career, so we went on to the next guy who was very supportive of my career.
Now, are these couples with the arranged marriages, are they of different ages? And also, do you have any statistics as to how many arranged marriages were looked at to make this comparison?
Yeah, it was a few hundred.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't a huge group, but, big enough. And the interesting thing is that, all of the people, whether they were in arranged marriages that I spoke to, whether they were in arranged marriages or whether they were in, regular marriages, Western idea of, falling in love marriage first and then getting married. It's just in arranged marriages, they do it in the other direction. They get married and then they fall in love because, everybody says, even in the love marriages, that you think you're in love with your husband when you marry him, but real love, true love, deep, meaningful love develops over time. And so, it's just a question of, how you define love. Is it that high chemistry, that kind of thing? Most people will say, they really were in love with their husbands as they bonded over the years.
What advice do you have for my listeners that might be in the older generation and they're out there looking? And certainly the older you are, the more difficult it may be in finding someone. Do you recommend going to one of these? And they're not always geared toward creating marriages between people. They're geared toward introducing people. But do you make a suggestion to older people to give that a try?
So you mean the matchmakers or dating coaches?
Yes, right.
Oh, absolutely. The dating coach that I worked with in the book, and I never thought I would, we all think, oh, I'll just fall in love. I'm not going to need any help. And the dating coach I worked with in the book was this wonderful person named Evan Mark Katz, and he was so helpful not only because he gave me the guy's perspective, which really, opened up my eyes to some things that I wasn't looking at, but he also just really, questioned some of my knee-jerk reactions to people before I had even met them. And I think that's so important because no matter how old you are, we still carry around these notions in our head of who that guy is. And he really helped me to open up the possibilities and make dating so much more pleasant and so much more, it was so refreshing to go out there.
Can you give us a quick wind-up as to what the hopeful message is in this book? A very brief one, but wind it up.
I think the hopeful message is that if you look for what's important and you let go of the stuff that's not, you allow yourself to truly fall in love with somebody and not spin your wheels out there dating and wonder why you're still single.
And have you met someone?
Well, I don't want to give away the ending of the book, but
we're going to surprise
yes.
people. So you used your own philosophy.
That's right.
Okay. Well, Laurie, it has been so great having you here with us. And I do want to mention to people that you have sold the movie rights for this. Marry Him has already been optioned by Tobey Maguire, of all people. And 6 Foot Under's Jill Soloway is writing the screenplay. I think that's going to be a hit movie. I think you've hit it right in time. So good luck on all of that. And I look forward to hearing from you again.
Thank you so much.